My name is Amanda Corona, and I serve as the chairwoman of the USD Alumni Board of Directors DEI Task Force. As a fellow alumna, let's hear it from my soul's grads. I'm thrilled to have you with us today for our second session of the Alumni Associations program, Living into Inclusion, a DEI plus A series for alumni. Today's session is presented by the University of San Diego's Alumni Board of Directors, my fellow volunteers, who are committed to creating and delivering valuable opportunities for all USD alumni to learn, grow, and connect. The mission of the USD Alumni Association and its board of directors is to engage and enrich the Torero community for life. Today's program is rooted in the desire to offer meaningful ways for our community to stay in touch and learn from one another. We know how strong our USD network is and hope these types of virtual opportunities will continue to strengthen the connection while bringing value to our lives. Today's session falls within the season of Lent. As a faith-based institution rooted in the Catholic faith and tradition, we are proud to offer these sessions on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access as an opportunity for learning and reflection. A few housekeeping items before I pass off the microphone. We are using Zoom webinar today. The Q&A feature has been activated for you to post questions for the presenter. And today's session is being recorded and will be posted to the Alumni Association's YouTube channel next week. Closed captioning has been activated for those who might want to access it. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's facilitator, Charles Bass, who will be introducing our featured speaker and conducting today's interview. Charles serves as the Senior Director of Alumni Relations for the University of San Diego. He has 30 plus years of experience in alumni engagement, and we're grateful for his leadership and support. Today, Charles will be introducing our featured alumni guest speaker and facilitating audience Q&A. Welcome to the screen, and I will pass it off to you, Charles.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thanks also to Kenneth Ehrman, another member of the board, for curating this important program on behalf of the Alumni Association. Also, a big thank you to our series sponsors, Valerie Atisha, also an alumni board member from the class of 1994, and her husband, Jason Harmon, who earned a master's degree from USD in 2020. It is now my pleasure to share a bit about our featured guest speaker, Dr. Jessica Williams, who received her doctorate from USD School of Leadership and Education Sciences in 2016. Jessica Williams, PhD, is a Black feminist artist and educator dedicated to cultivating authenticity as a means to empowerment. Dr. J now works primarily as a client-proclaimed discomfort doula. Her work often focuses on helping individuals and organizations process uncomfortable elements that are often barriers to connection, engagement, belonging, and inclusion. Most notably, she contributed an essay entitled Black Surrender Within the Ivory Tower to the New York Times bestselling anthology, You Are Your Best Thing: Vulnerability, Shame, and the Black Experience. Dr. J is also the CEO and co-owner of Golden Peaches, an empowerment-centered wellness resource created to provide coaching interventions for individuals and organizations. She facilitates workshops, keynotes, and leads leadership panels that aid in individuals becoming more authentic and aligned through identity work, comprehensive wellness, and creative expression. Her most recent contribution to the field of authenticity and identity is her workbook, Inviting Your Whole Self to the Table, an interactive tool to help individuals feel empowered in who you are, as you are, wherever you are. I love that. Jessica, welcome. So good to have you with us. You've been a featured speaker before, and it's great to have you back.
Thank you for having me. I always love to be of service to USD. So I'm happy to be here.
Well, we appreciate it. And I mentioned keynotes. You mentioned earlier in our lead up to this that you are in New Jersey right now, getting ready for some participating in a series of keynote speeches.
Yes, I am. I have kind of 4 keynotes lined up this month, plus, this talk where I'm just going to be talking about the power in our story, and how our story contributes to our culture and our greater communal cultural story. So, doing the work, keeping it fun.
All right. And of course, but before we don't want to distract anything, but we want to mention that you are about to be a godmother officially on, is it tomorrow or no, in 2 weeks.
Next
So
weekend. Yes.
yes,
Yes.
congratulations.
This is very exciting for me and everyone. I know that you are all very excited for me as well.
That's good. That's good. Well,
Yeah.
let's jump right into it, and kind of, we have a series of questions here, but if anybody would like to use the Q&A feature, please do so, and we'll get to your questions when we can. So jump right in. What does it mean to be your best self?
Oh gosh. You know, I think to be my best self is to feel like um I can be how I feel in any space. Um, you know, when I was in grad school, particularly at USD, like we did a lot of interrogating of ourselves and interrogating of kind of like just the environment around us. And what I really learned is that not just for leaders, but for everybody, like in order to be able to take up space, in order to be able to feel like I can provide something positive to a community, I have to feel safe there. I have to feel like I'm welcome there. And I think like me being my best self is not necessarily me being like the greatest version of me, but it is being however I feel in that moment authentically, right? So if I'm overwhelmed, if I'm sad, if I'm, having a panic attack. Was in my keynote this past weekend, I was telling them how I did a job interview in full panic and I just had to speak to it. And so like, I think that is me being my best self, even though I would never, like if you said, "Hey, Jessica, who's your best self?" I would never say my panic, sweaty self. But in that moment, I felt incredibly strong and courageous for being able to like get through that moment, knowing how I felt and just telling myself like, you still have access to your training. You still have access to, your skills and abilities. You can still speak to your ability to do this job, even though you're having this moment of anxiety, you're having this moment of kind of ickiness.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like my best self is just when I'm claiming my humanity.
So let's, without, I don't want to get too personal, but talk about that, the panic attack, and how, what you did to address it, and how you would recommend others kind of work through that in the moment.
Yeah. For me, when I'm experiencing those moments, whether it's a panic attack or whether it's just any moment that kind of knocks me off my game, where I don't feel like, I'm stepping with my best foot forward. Um, Honestly, it takes, for me, it's breath. Truly, just, it's the cure all. I have to take a moment and just breathe and remember who I am. And I always think about, that moment where Simba finds Rafiki, like in The Lion King, he's like, remember who you are. But it really is like that, just taking a moment to say, like, I've got this. Like I'm so much more than just this moment of what feels like discomfort or what feels like um sometimes even ineptitude. But I've got everything else behind me. I'm so much more than that. And so I think it's just taking a breath and remembering, recalling myself.
You're standing on all your past successes and past failures and past just learning opportunities,
Yeah.
and those are what's holding you up and keeping you
Mhm.
forward. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What does safety and security feel like for you?
Um, Safety and security feels like for me, um, that I can be immediately what came to my mind was Zachary Green, Dr. Zachary Green, who is professor of practice in the leadership department. He's amazing. But the reason I thought of him was because we had this moment in our class where Lamont, actually, who's now superintendent for San Diego Unified, said, we had this experience where you're able to be pushed and pulled and challenged and held at the same time. And that to me is safety, is security, where I can feel like not necessarily you're going to tell me everything's going to be okay, and it is, but that you can say, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm holding your hand. Like that to me feels like a really authentic, secure place to be. Because so often we're navigating the unknown and the anxiety comes from not knowing. And so I'm kind of overly skeptical of somebody who promises to have the answer. But I can trust and I can feel safe when somebody's like, we can be lost but holding hands.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I really just appreciate those moments of being able to like just not know, right? And feel like I have somebody with me that I can trust and they're going to be honest with me, right? They're going to say, you need to get it together, or they're going to say, you're being really hard on yourself. Whatever it is that I need to hear. Um, and 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 that's what it feels like for me, like that, having that balance of the push pull, having that balance of the support, and kind of that push to get better, the critique.
What would you suggest when somebody maybe doesn't have that person right there with them, doesn't have has to kind of look inward and rely on themselves to be that source of we've got this, even though we as me.
Yeah, I think just you have to develop a voice. Well, I don't even say you have to develop it. I think within us, we all have a voice that is like our capital S self, that is very sure. And that is usually like when our mind is going 1,000 miles a minute in anxiety, like there's something in us that feels like you're going to be okay. And it's like if we can quiet down the noise and get to that voice. But so I think what it takes is like intentionally practicing listening for that voice within ourselves, right? Listening and thinking through, like, okay, I have been in challenging situations before. How did I get through it? Sometimes when I'm in like a kind of just like a whirlwind of, I don't know how I'm going to see myself through this situation. I don't know how I'm going to get through this like muck that I'm in. I just remember, okay, what did you do the last time you were in one of those, situations that felt impossible or improbable to navigate? I took a breath, remember who I was, called my system, my support system, and I took it one step at a time. And so it's just before I have that conversation with anybody else, I have to have it with myself, right? So I have to be able to say, okay, Jessica, you've got to calm down. Like you gotta, or give myself a minute. Because I think that's also important too. You've got to know how much time you need to be emotional. And I think all of those come with really knowing yourself and not punishing yourself for how you feel, but instead like taking inventory and saying like, however I feel, it's valid, and trying to really understand your feelings versus trying to dictate your feelings and saying, no, I'm not going to feel sadness today, or I'm not going to feel angry today. Say, no, I'm angry, but why am I angry? And is it worth being angry over? Instead, like have a different conversation with yourself about your emotions.
Let's take a little side trip here and ask the question: what does discomfort doula mean?
So I got this from a book group that I was working with at Penn, and they told me that they were like, you, in every session that we worked together, you made us do what we didn't want to do. Like there was just no way around the discomfort. And because I was facilitating the process, they were like, you were our discomfort doula. Like you helped us get through this, because they were it was a inclusion group. We were just talking about like inclusion within like the specific subset of like their graduate work, and how to bring in some things into their research and what that might look like. And when you're pointing out blind spots, when you're pointing out, what conversations have you not had, and then they're like, oh my gosh, why haven't I thought of that? And that can be such a point of panic for somebody who's in a doctoral program, when you say something and they're like, I haven't thought of that. My whole research is a sham. Like that's immediately where your head goes. And it's like, no, 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 it's not a sham. but this, like, it's okay that you feel uncomfortable, but like, let's process that, right? Like, let's talk about it. And so they just found, for like in our work together, they're like, you're just really good at helping us when we met those moments of, I don't want to do this anymore, and this is too hard, and this is like, I want to look away from this, or I want to check out from this. And I think part of that is because of my counseling background. Like, I always tell people, like, I can sit in silence, and I will wait you out. Like, we can sit here and just look at each other, kind of thing. But I'm just really comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I've learned that as a person who's like a leadership practitioner, like, it's the key to everything. So many people are just working through discomfort. And if you can figure out how to help them, you can figure out how to empower them.
That's where growth comes from, right? That just getting outside your comfort zone and doing that which you don't want to do, but you're going to learn from,
Mhm.
hopefully positively. That's now I understand it, and I will keep that in mind, the discomfort doula.
Yes.
What does it mean to you to be seen, heard, and valued?
Um, you know, I feel like when people see me, hear me, and value me, it means that, like I said before, I can just show up and be who I am, how I am. Like, this is a really small example, but feeling like I didn't have to put on makeup or change my hair or change my outfit to show up and talk to you today. You know what I'm saying? Like, um, this is just what I decided I wanted to wear today. And I can feel like, just because my hair is wrapped or my shoulders are bare, like, I can still show up and I can hold space as like a leader, hold space as somebody who has um proficiency in their field. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can still show up and I can hold my space and I can hold my expertise without necessarily playing into the role of professionalism. I'm playing with it. I know I'm not professionally dressed today, but that's okay. And so I think, to be seen and heard, that's what it means. It's like, I can show up to be seen in this way. You, Kara, Amanda, the audience, receive me. You're not punishing me for not being a certain way. Um, and then to be valued is saying, like, I'm not going to hold it against this person that they're not dressed the way I am, or that they're not dressed in a way that society might say you have to be dressed in professional dress, or according to what a woman should look like, or according to what a Black woman, or all these other things. And it's saying, I'm going to have the experience with this person being to being. And that's what I think, seen, heard, and valued is that I'm going to allow my humanity to have an experience with your humanity. And that's what I'm going to go on, just our energy and our vibe. I'm going to try and, um, everything else, it informs us about the person, but it is not the person. And so I think if we can just get to the heart of the person, um, in the midst of all the information about them, which is like our identities, right? And how we present ourselves. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
what.
And who creates that space for you? Is it you, or do you hope to be in a place where that space is created, or is it reliant on you to do it yourself?
It's both, and, I think, I have to be willing to show up and be seen and be heard. And also, I look for places that see me and hear me and that value me, like, there are reasons why I continue to work with the USD community, because I feel like I'm seen, heard, and valued here. And there are other communities where it's harder, where you feel like you have to present in a certain way, or in order to be seen, or in order to be valued. And I don't always want to feel that way. And so I think it's important for me to, like, for everybody to take inventory of, where are the places that make you feel good? Where are the places that make you feel seen, heard, valued? Um, and if you don't have places that you feel that way, like, what's the cost? right? Like, what's the cost of having to show up and be compartmentalized in that way where you can't show up fully? Because I think there is a cost to it, and I don't think it's you know un Liz Gilbert says unused creativity is not benign, but I think unused expression, like self-expression, is not benign. Like, it's cancerous to not be yourself. And yeah, I think it takes a toll on you after a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. For some reason, I thought of this, a comment by Monsignor Dillabo, Dan Dillabo, the former vice president for mission and ministry, who talked about, we were talking about something that somebody didn't think was Catholic enough. And he was saying that sometimes people really get caught up on the ritual versus the content, perhaps. And I think that's kind of along the lines of what you were talking about, in terms of, showing up as you are to, but because of the content and what you know and what you can share, that that is the thing that you're bringing to this experience.
Mhm.
I think I'm paraphrasing somewhat correctly or not.
I heard
Moving
it.
right along. Or go ahead. What are you gonna say?
No, I said I heard it back. That was right.
Yeah. Okay, good. I was listening and reflecting. Nice.
Yeah.
I'll pat myself on the back a little bit later. So um, I asked this question. So this is, of course, a series, and I asked this question last week of our speaker, and I wanted to know. So, particularly, a lot of your work is in the DEI and A or DEIB in the belonging sphere. How do you react or respond when somebody responds to the suggestion of a program or suggestion of something like this as and its importance in a less than enthusiastic way? How do you react? I'm trying to be, you're not politically correct, but not give power to somebody who I don't think has earned it.
Right. I think um a lot of times DEI work is structurally set up that way anyway, because it's seen as othered versus integrated into every other thing. It's not like the DEI component of accounting, the DEI component of HR. It's like the DEI office and HR and accounting. It's already separate and siloed. And so I think that says something. But I try to always just center humanity. And I will talk to someone, because I've had people, like, I'm teaching right now, and they're like heels dug in. I'm not a prejudiced person. I'm not discriminate, or just for someone who discriminates on other people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, it's not about that. It's about understanding, or it's not always about that, right? It's about understanding that there's just different people in the world. And it's not about something that you've personally done. It's about how we all can be more invested in a system that is more just, that is more humane. And even if I, like, take me out of it, I didn't do anything to anybody, right? Just because Noel said. But if one person in the world says this system isn't fair, who am I to say that their experience is invalid and that their experience is wrong? And so I think that's kind of how I sell DEI work. It's like, it's humanity. And it's plain and simple. Like, I want to make sure that every person, regardless of their experience, abilities, skill set, feels like they are represented in the policies, right? Feels like they have a space within the organization, feels like our mission and values include them. Like, it's just that baseline. And I think that is a lot easier sell for people. I think that's a lot less charge for people than coming in hot with, you haven't been doing enough of this, or you've been doing too much of that. Because our actions are so deeply personal, and it's all about how we've made sense of the world, and it's all about how we've come to understand things. I've had 60-year-old men who come to me and say, well, I never thought of it like this. And I'm like, you weren't ever supposed to. That's not intentional. I mean, that's not an accident. It's very intentional that you were allowed to remain ignorant to all of these other experiences in the world.
Mhm.
But now that you know, what are you going to do about it, right? It's like, I'm not going to hold you accountable for all the years that you didn't know. But now that you hear this clicking pin, what are you going to do about it? And how do you move forward now armed with the knowledge that you have? And so, yeah, I think just a lot of grace and just leaning on humanity.
I think we could just take that quote and just have everybody follow those two little things, a lot of grace and lean on humanity. The world would be a lot better.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Stacey Douglas last week said, look, diversity and inclusion, in particular, we were talking about racial identity, but diversity and inclusion means all people, not to the exclusion of old white men, or as one myself, I feel like I can say that it's old white men are a part of diversity and inclusion, and young Black women, and all in between. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah. How so? But still, I don't want to stay too negative, but how do you handle people or places that are not welcoming?
Who would dare not welcome me?
They'd be crazy.
I
I
am
don't know.
sunshine. Um, there are very few places, honestly, where I felt like truly unwelcome. And I think a part of that has to do with like my own just authorship and agency of feeling comfortable and feeling like I belong to wherever I am.
Mhm.
Um, but I will say I've been in places that have felt deeply uncomfortable for different reasons. And how I handle it is, I guess you kind of got to assess the situation and figure out, it goes honestly back to safety. Like, am I going to be safe if I take up full space as myself? And if not, I'm just going to keep it cute, keep it quiet, and get through this, this moment. And I think that's a very normal like reaction. That's just basic survival, right? We're always trying to figure out how we can survive and move forward. And I think for me, like I said, it's very rare that I feel like, oh, I gotta silence myself, or not even like I gotta diminish myself in some way. And when I do feel that, I interrogate it, because I ask myself, like, why do you feel that way? What's making you feel like you don't belong, or you don't um have a say in what's going on? And sometimes it's very valid, and sometimes it's just in my head. And so I have to kind of take a moment to ask myself that. But I've definitely been in places where I'm like, you just got to get through this. You just got to get through this moment, get out of this moment, and go on about your business. Because, I think we've all had conversations with people where you're like, I'm not going to change this person's mind. I
Mhm.
am not going to change this person's mind. And I think when you recognize that, as soon as you recognize that, I go into energy conservation mode. Like, I'm completely like, okay, you're right. And I disengage, because I feel like my power, my energy, my love is like better spent elsewhere. I'd rather invest my energy in like my community and in things that love me and can give back to me, can be reciprocal, versus trying to engage and try to change some. I'm not going to force you to see my humanity, right? Like, I'm not going to argue you down and then all of a sudden you're going to be like, you're right. You deserve full rights and freedoms. If you don't believe that about me, I don't have time.
Yeah,
But what I can do is I can invest my energy in communities and in spaces that do feel that way, and that do feel welcoming, and that do feel safe, and do feel like I can belong in those places. Everything else, I'm just surviving to move on.
got it. Why is empowerment and leadership important to you, or important not to you, to all?
I think, I recently started saying empowerment over leadership, because I I found that's really what my work was. Um, when I was first doing my dissertation, it was about um, reducing shame, and how do we like kind of change shame narratives into something more positive. And obviously that was empowering to people. So what I found is that if I'm a leader, I'm really doing two things. I'm mitigating anxiety and I'm working towards empowerment. And sometimes those two things work at the same time. But in order to get to this goal, right? In order to get to this change, this vision. And so yeah, I feel like empowerment is me saying yes to my humanity, me saying yes to like all parts of me, not just the parts that have been praised as successful. So like not just the PhD Jessica, but also the Jessica who like sucks at kickball. Like she's valid too. You know what I mean? Like I'm talking to all parts of me and all parts are welcome. And it's like, yeah, because if I hadn't have been horrible at kickball, I wouldn't have been sitting on the side thinking about human dynamics and thinking about, you know, how to finesse my PE teacher and through an A. Like all of these things, all of these experiences that I've gone through truly have made me me. And I think when you sit back and you think about even like your errors, there's this poem by Nikki Giovanni. She's like, even my errors are correct. And I think about that a lot. Like, even the things that are wrong about me are right about me and they make me me. And I could not lead in the way that I lead if it weren't for the things that I see as like negatives or see as like bad or that someone else has told me was bad or not good about myself. And so I think empowerment is the only word for that. Like that to me isn't leadership. That's me finding power in myself. So yeah.
We should empower you to be the kickball coach so you can get everybody going.
But I could never.
I've tying it back to USD. I was in a leadership group discussion with President Harris, and he talked about and he was talking about vulnerability, but approaching things from a sense of abundance versus a sense of fear. And so utilizing what you just said, your errors, your successes, your kickball experience, your success in getting a PhD, that is all part of your abundance. So I think about that a lot. So when you think of somebody who's a university president who's been in that role for 25 years, but had only recently sort of adopted this way of thinking of things. So I appreciate that approach. So we talk about a lot about empowerment, and stories. So how can I become more empowered in my story?
Tell yourself good things about yourself. Honestly, I came up with my workbook, and one of the reasons that I came up with it was because I referred back to a lot of the prompts and the processes that I talk about in my workbook, which really is just, I say it's 30 pages of therapy. It truly is. It's just like hard questions and you sit down. You sit down and you answer them. But one of the hard questions is like, who am I on one page? And the next thing is like, well, what else can be true? And so it's always this asking yourself this question, like, how do I know what I know about myself? If you've always told yourself, like you said, I'm an old white man. Well, what does being an old white man mean? And how does being an old white man look different for you than it does for any other old white man? Right. And for me, like, how does being a Black woman look for me versus being a Black woman for anybody else? And how do I make it like, how do I write my name in a way that I'm the only Jessica? Do you know that? You know what I mean by that? Like, how do I say it in a way that like this can only be me? And I think it's really, really spending time with self to tell yourself good things. And also to think about, like, we have so many voices in our head that we don't even know. When you start to pay attention to all of the things, this was a pivotal moment for me in my life. I was driving and the car was making a noise or something. And I was like, oh my gosh, the car's making a noise, the tire's gonna fall off, I'm gonna get in a car accident and some like, And as I realized I was spinning that narrative, I heard it in my mother's voice. And the second I realized it was Della and not me, I kicked it out because I was like, this is my mom. This is not me. But it was so liberating to say, oh my gosh, this is my mom being fearful about all the things she can't control when I'm not in her presence. And like, I get that. I get it. And also, what else can be true? Well, maybe you just need a little air in the tire. Check it at the gas station and like let that be that. But in those moments, it's like I have to take that time to like have that conversation and say, what's the voice in my head? What am I telling myself about myself in this moment? And is it helpful? Is it actually serving anything good? Is it serving the version of me that I want to put out into the world? So yeah, that's what you gotta do. You gotta whisper yourself sweet nothings or
Yeah,
sweet.
I think people can let those negative voices in their head just take control and cause all kinds of havoc.
Mhm.
So I'm subject to that myself at times. So you mentioned this workbook. How would somebody like me find this workbook?
So my workbook, like everything else I create, is available on my website. It's jessicajamise.com. And I do have a discount code, 20% off for Toreros for the rest of the month. So Toreros 20, and I'm sure Kara has put that somewhere.
I think she did on it's on the registration page, but I think she'll
Yes.
probably put it in the chat too.
Um, but yeah, so I created it, and it's one of those things where I'll get people who are like, should I get this? You know, and I tell people, not that I don't want to just sell out of workbooks, like obviously I want to sell them, but I tell people really, if you're not ready to sit with yourself and do work, because it really is intended to be a mirror. It's intended to be an opportunity to sit with someone who does this work and and go through these prompts and really be self-reflective and be ready to show up more fully in your spaces. So the workbook is called inviting your whole self to the table, but it's and before you can invite your whole self to the table, you have to know your whole self. And so it takes you through introducing yourself to yourself, understanding who those voices are that reside inside of you. Where did they come from? What are they saying? How can they say something more positive? And then building the community, like everything that we just talked about in this talk. We talk about how do you feel seen, valued, heard, and then where are those places where you feel seen, valued, heard? Who are the people? Like I ask you all of those things in the workbook because that's important. We have to know the places that we feel safe. And I always kind of refer back to this story about survivalists. Like these are people who are preparing for the end of the world. And they said the one thing we need, even more than water, is people we can trust. Because if you have people you can trust, then you have multiple perspectives, multiple experiences, multiple intelligences and geniuses working towards a solution. And it's not just on you. And I think like that's a beautiful way to live. So yeah.
I love that. So once again, if you have anything you want to ask, you can use the Q&A feature, and we'll repeat this again. But Jessica Jamise, JAMESE.com, and use Toreros 20 for 20% off through the end of April on that workbook. Thank you for doing that. Your fellow Toreros will appreciate it. Another question I received was, you talked about personal, and you kind of just mentioned a little bit of this, but you mentioned personal responsibility earlier. And can you elaborate on how our individual responsibility plays into being the gatekeeper of our own stories as it pertains to who we want to be?
Yeah. I think you know, first I have to ask myself, like, how do I want to show up in the world? Who am I and how do I want to show up? And I got a question over the weekend that was about code switching. Like, is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? And it's like, I don't assign any value whether it's good or bad, but I understand that code switching is a tool that has allowed me to communicate across different audiences. And I think of, all things in my experiences or in my experience, like I'm not trying to categorize it as good or bad. It just is. And it's made me be able to like meet this moment in this way. And so I think when I'm talking about like an individual coming to, gatekeeping or crafting my story, I have to know who I am, how I want to show up in the world, and in order to be able to communicate that effectively across audiences, right? Because it's not always going. If I'm communicating my truth to my mother versus communicating my truth to the USD board versus communicating my truth to a client, it's gonna look and sound and feel very different, but they're all me. It doesn't mean that I'm any less me in any of those exchanges, but it does mean that I am thinking critically about how can I be heard? How, am I speaking in a way that I can be heard by my audience? Am I showing up in a way that I can be seen by my audience? And kind of it's a delicate, balance of going back and forth and understanding like, am I doing this for the gaze or am I doing this for myself? Not the gaze, like like gaze, GAZE.
Yeah.
Am I doing this for, performative measures? Am I doing this to acclimate, or am I doing this because this is what's authentic and real and truthful for me? And I think, you only get the answer by asking the questions. So sitting with yourself, like I said, and just being willing and knowing that this is iterative. You're going to be doing this forever and ever and ever and ever, right? Like, but knowing that I feel like if I'm willing to spend time and work on anything, it's me. Like I definitely feel like I'm the prize. And so I'm committed to working on myself because I want to always make sure I'm communicating myself in the way that I want to be received. Um, so yeah, I think it's just being really clear, being
Okay.
really clear.
Yeah. A question that was asked in advance via the registration process. Somebody asked, how does access related to disabilities play into your work?
Huh. I think about access a lot. And it sometimes you don't know until you know, but I think it comes, am never willing, I'm never unwilling to be wrong or corrected. Like if I say something, please correct me every time. But I think thinking about like accommodation, even with like when I started making social media content, I would get people that would say, hey, please remember to do captions. Hey, please remember to have like sound at certain volumes so we can hear this sound. Like it doesn't, the captions will mix up. Or like at the keynote I was just at, thinking about chairs, thinking about entrances, thinking about like all of these different things. And I think, for me as somebody who I always check, like when I'm doing a job application, I always check I have a disability because I have PTSD, anxiety, and depression. And I think about how, certain policies, I think it goes back to policy a lot for me and humanity. Um, you know, you have to you get 8 days of PTO, right? But if I call out and I use my PTO the day of, it's looked down upon. But the reality of my disability is that's when it comes, right? Like I don't know until I know. And so knowing that about myself, it's changed the way that I teach. I had to change like attendance policies. I changed um, you know, communication policies with my students, but also changed the way I engage like within the world. Because I'm like, man, people, you just don't know the battles that people are going through. And sometimes, especially with mental health issues, people aren't actively claiming the space of disabled or claiming the space of I need an accommodation because of my mental health or learning disability issue. And so, like I said, I try to think about the voices other than myself when I'm creating content or when I'm creating an experience, but also just being willing to have people inform me, have people correct me, have people say, you use these pronouns, you forgot about this, and this, or you brought up these examples, but you didn't bring this, and this. I welcome that. Like, tell me, because I think it only helps me to be better. And again, you only get that in a culture of trust. When you feel safe to be able to show up, then you also feel safe to be able to correct someone, right? Like I said, that push pull, you have to have both. And I think when you have the community and you have that trust within your community, then you can bring up things like that and make sure that we're holding each other accountable.
Excellent. All right, we have time for just one or two more questions. And if anybody wants to put anything else in the Q&A, they can do that. There's a section in your workbook, relationships as mirrors. How do the relationships we choose mirror how we want to be seen?
Mhm. You know, I was reading on Twitter this morning, a friend of mine was at a trainer, like a personal trainer, and the trainer was like, "Come on, fatty, get up, move that body, da da da," and like was speaking just down, and it was like a group fitness class, and so everybody was like just used to the trainer speaking to them like this, and I said, God, that would just not work for me because I am someone who I need positivity and I need love or I don't need it, you know? And so I think one of those things is like my relationship to everything needs to be positive, needs to be love, needs to be warm, needs to be welcoming. When I'm at my most fragile, like if I'm having like a really hard anxiety time, the music that I listen to changes. I have a playlist of like 4 hours of affirmational music. Um, I give up my beloved Housewives. I have to turn off Bravo. You know what I'm saying? I have to watch wholesome TV. I watch a lot of The Voice. I watch just like wholesome TV where people are doing things that they love and they're happy and they're just thriving. Um, and that's what it's like. You have to change. You have to create mirrors in your life that support and uphold the vision of who you are, right? If you are a positive person and you're a person who is like love and light, you can't exist in muck and chaos. Like it just doesn't work that way. And so it's literally creating relationships with people and with things around you that affirm the kind of person that you want to be in the world. And so if I'm a calm, peaceful person, then like downstairs right now, I have vibrational music playing because I just need it in the background. There's candles going, like I clean the house. Why is the house clean? For you to see this one Zoom, this box. But it all creates my environment, my space of safety, and it's my mirror that helps me be able to like reflect properly.
That's fantastic. I don't think I should ask any more questions because that's a perfect way to wrap up. In your, even though you're in this little box, we know that you're in a place of comfort and safety, and you brought knowledge for us to think about and to learn from. And I am grateful for that, and grateful for you.
Thank you. I truly do love my Torero community, so I'm always happy to take part, be a part of the work, and have these kinds of conversations.
Well, that's fantastic. We appreciate you. And let me remind folks that your website is Jessica, JAMESE.com. And you can go there and use the code Toreros20 for 20% off through the end of April on that workbook. And that is it for our program. I want to thank Kara Marsh Prophet, who's behind the scenes today and keeping us on the air, as it were. And we appreciate all her work. She also came up with lots of questions. And also want to thank our alumni board DEI task force, and Amanda Corona, grateful for her, and for Kenneth Ehrman for helping with the program today, and our sponsors, Valerie Atisha, and Jason Harmon. Jessica, thank you so much, and a very happy birthday to you in just a few days. The Living into Inclusion series continues next Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific with a session entitled Infusing Mindfulness as a Pathway for DEI Work, featuring alumna Jessica Chang. You can learn all about this series and other Alumni Association programs by visiting our website, alumni.sandiego.edu, and you can see a replay of this and all kinds of programs on our YouTube channel. That's the USD Alumni Association YouTube channel. Thank you again for joining us. Thanks, Jessica, and go Toreros.